because that's all right.
Well, yeah.
That's what I.
Let everybody know we are actually broadcasting live now, just to test the system before the meeting starts. We're ready when you are, Chair.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee of Shropshire and Telford. Move to the agenda. Apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Dag Saunders and Janet O'Loughlin.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Minutes of the last meeting. Now these are to follow. Unfortunately, they're not being able to prepare them in time, so they will be coming to the next meeting. Thank you. West Midlands Ambulance Service. Welcome. I'm sorry you can only see the back of my head, but could you start your introduction about the changes, if you don't mind, please?
If I go first then, hello, my name is Murray McGregor, I'm the Communications Director for WMAS. I'll pass on to Mark.
My name is Mark Doherty and I'm the Executive Director of Nursing and Clinical Commissioning at West Midlands Ambulance Service.
Can you turn his camera on when he speaks?
Pardon?
Can you put their cameras on when they speak?
As far as I can tell, my camera is on. I don't know if it's coming across.
I think it's the system.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anyone else?
I think we have got Vivek, but I think he's just trying to log in at the moment. So apologies that he's not here at the moment. Vivek's Strategy and Engagement Director.
No. Thank you. Hillary, would you like to take a seat? Hillary, you're down here. Do you have a presentation for us, or do you want to go straight into questions?
We're happy to do whatever you like. I mean, we can set some of the background and then take questions, or just take questions, whichever the committee would like, really.
You can set a 10-minute background. That would be really useful for many of the committee members who are new to the committee. Thank you.
All right, well, allowing us to come and speak to you today. I think one of the things that we'd like to start off by saying is that our performance in Shropshire is simply not good enough. To get to patients, and that's something that we're trying very hard to address. I'm sure you've read all the papers, so I won't dwell in great detail about them, but as you'll have seen from the papers that we submitted to you, one of the biggest issues that we face currently is the issue of hospital handover delays. In the papers that you've got, you've seen the data for September about the length of time that we're taking to hand over patients at the two Shropshire hospitals. And I did just a short while ago do the more recent data for October. And when I tell you that our average handover times at PRH is now 1 hour and 6 minutes, and at RSH it's 2 hours 17 minutes, where the national target is to clinically hand over patients in 15 minutes, you can see the level of difficulty that we have, because we simply have many crews tied up at hospital, and if they're tied up at hospital, they simply can't respond to patients. And that has a disproportionately large effect on our ability to get to patients, and there is a direct correlation between our poor performance and the issues that we have at hospitals. And that's not to say that we don't have great sympathy for the hospitals, because we do. Hospitals are still working to fairly tight COVID restrictions, which reduces their capacity. They've equally seen a large increase in call numbers, or not call numbers, a number of people going to their ED departments in the same way as we've had a huge increase in the number of 999 calls that we've had. For us, to put it into perspective, you know, we're seeing generally as a rule over 5,000 999 calls in a day. We should be seeing about 4,000, and in July that got up to 6,400 calls in a day. So the numbers of calls coming in are huge. Equally, they're obviously trying to play catch up with elective surgery that was cancelled during the earlier stages of the pandemic. So they're really under the cloth. And we have daily dialogues with the hospital to try and understand how we can try and make the situation better. We have hospital ambulance liaison officers, HALOs, that work at the two hospitals, trying to free up crews as quickly as possible. And that brings us on to the issue of the CAS sites. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, we've tried to do to make our performance better is to free up as much time, ambulance time, as we possibly can. And that's led to us taking the difficult decision to close the CAS sites. Not only that, we've had to bring that forward simply because the level of delays that we're experiencing and the trouble that we're having trying to get to patients. But if I can explain a little bit more, just to sort of put you in the picture about that. So through no fault of the crews that are based at the CAS points, they are or were inherently inefficient. So when a crew comes on at Shrewsbury or Donington hubs, they come onto a vehicle that is cleaned, it's been fueled, and it's got a standard load list on it. And that's designed to keep it going for the full 12-hour shift. At the CAS points, the 4 CAS points that there were in Shropshire, one at say 7 o'clock in the morning, they came onto a vehicle that was already half a shift old. So right from the word go, we start to lose time. So because of the nature of their job, they have to check what's on the vehicle before they can start. So we immediately lose 10 to 15 minutes as the crew do that. The crew then start responding to jobs, but at some point during their shift, they have to go to the hub to swap over onto a new vehicle, because each vehicle has to be cleaned after at least every 12 hours. So let's say that the Oswestry vehicle ends up at RSH, it then has to spend 10 minutes going to our hub in Shrewsbury, so they can swap over vehicles. You know, so that's another 10 minutes we've lost. So we've already lost 20, 25 minutes of ambulance time just simply through inefficiencies. They then take another 10 minutes to swap over the vehicle, perhaps go to the toilet, things like that. So we're up to 35, 40 minutes of lost time through no fault of anybody's other than the system. The crew then continue to respond to jobs, and at some point they will have their meal break between hours 4 and 8 of their 12-hour shift. Because of the agreement that we have with Staff Site, they then have to drive back to Oswestry to have their meal break. So we lose them for another half hour. So there's an hour and 10 minutes gone of their shift. And then meal break, they then start to respond to incidents again. But as we've discussed, the hospital handover delays are significant. So if they end up at Royal Shrewsbury at the end of their shift with their last job, then they could be anything up to, well, we've had crews wait up to 11 hours to hand over. So with the best one in the world, they're going to finish late. They then have to drive that further 30 minutes back to the CAS point. So without even trying, they've lost an hour and a half to 2 hours of their shift just because they were based at a CAS site. Now, it's not only that that's the problem. The crew that are coming on at 7 PM to take over from them, because there's no other vehicle based at the CAS site, they then have to wait for the crew to get back from Shrewsbury before they can start their shift. So we lose yet more time. So you can easily see that we're losing 3 hours plus every day out of every 24 hours, just simply when we've got a CAS site. So if you multiply up the amount of time that we lose just having CAS sites by the 10 CAS sites that we've recently closed, you can see that we could get to an additional 5,000 to 6,000 cases every year to patients that would otherwise be waiting for an ambulance to respond. Now, Clearly, I think we'd like to hold our hands up and say that we haven't done as well as we could or should have done in regards to the consulting about this. Now, there is clearly no substantial variation in the service, so there was no legal requirement to do it, but I think we accept that we should have talked to the council more sooner about it, and equally the town councils about that, and for that we apologise. As I said, we had to bring a lot of these closures forward simply because of the dire circumstances that we find ourselves in, and we literally are doing absolutely everything we can to get to patients, and this gives us an opportunity to get to more patients more quickly than we currently do. I'm not sure whether Mark's managed to dial back. No, he hasn't managed to dial back in, which is unfortunate. But hopefully that gives you a sort of setting the scene of where we are and what's happened over the last couple of months. But we'd be very pleased to try and answer your questions now.
Okay. To be honest, what you're saying to me is very reminiscent to a conversation that we had with the chief of the ambulance service about 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, when you came to Telford Wrekin and actually made the changes that was necessary there, which was closing a few of the ambulance stations, and the promises that was made to the area then, which was basically that you would have ambulances not in buildings, but actually in locations where they were able to respond much faster. They wouldn't be, there would be always ambulances able to attend there. That you would have super paramedics on each ambulance, and this is your boss's thing. Then there would be these super paramedics. They could actually say to patients, no, you don't need an ambulance. You need to go and see your doctor. Yep. Now, none of this has came to fruition. I've never seen an ambulance on the site you were proposed. We've only got the one location, as you know, which is the garage down in Tufton. But what is going to change from the promises you made to us to the promises you're going to make into Shropshire now? Which is, I agree, buildings are not important. But what is important is to have to the people and making sure that they can attend within a reasonable time. Now, the other thing was that ambulances, once they go out of our area, can then be relocated to other areas. So we don't have ambulances coming back in and waiting. Now, we've got a huge area. Shropshire is one of the biggest areas in England, county areas in England, and they have huge areas which they have to cover. You also had at hospitals a thing called HALO, and that's a hospital ambulance liaison officer. And what would happen is, because we are having delays here, that the ambulance would roll up to the hospital, they'd offload the patients, the ambulance liaison officer would take over that control of that patient, and the ambulances would be allowed to go away and actually continue the job. Now those heroes have disappeared. We're back to a situation where the crisis is, there's 10 ambulances being seen outside Shropshire Hospital. If they're sitting out there, they certainly ain't picking up patients. Now, it's all right making promises and saying this is going to happen. Where is the guarantees to the people in Shropshire? They've had a crap service, as you readily admitted. We need to make sure, and just putting ambulances, closing stations ain't going to do that. Okay, you're going to free up some more time, but of the ambulance drivers as well. I've seen them going up to Tesco's and using their toilet facilities in order for them to be able to just have toilet facilities. Now, there has to be a welfare issue as well.
Yeah, gosh, there's quite a list there. I'll try and get through all of those. I remember the meeting some 7 or 8 years ago when we did come to see you in Telford and Wrekin. So the proof of the pudding was that for the last 8 years, we've had the best response times of any ambulance service in the country, including in Shropshire. If you compare our response times to other areas that are similarly very rural, our response times have been far better than those. So the system clearly did work. You commented about paramedics. We're the only ambulance service in the country that has a paramedic on every vehicle. And when you look at what they do, we now take less than 50% of patients to hospital. There are other trusts that are still taking 65% of patients to hospital. I think I haven't looked at the exact figure today, but when I looked at the figure yesterday, it was down at 43% of patients being taken to hospital. So the system does definitely work. You mentioned about cohorting, and the halos are definitely still there. They are commissioned, and we make sure that we do have halos there every single day. And when even when they're on holiday, we backfill them to make sure that there are halos there. And we do cohort patients, and we are now cohorting even more patients to try and get our crews off on time, despite the difficulties that that brings because of the pandemic and the necessity to keep people separated. You mentioned an interesting point about ambulances out of area, and if you look at the data that we provided to you, the reality is really quite different. So I gave you data for June, July, August and September, and it shows that actually Shropshire was a net importer of ambulances into the county. In September, that was 17 a day that were coming in to do jobs in Shropshire. So Shropshire actually benefits from being part of the region, not just benefits from being part of the region. You mentioned toilets. And it's a good point, well made. Our staff do need to go to the toilet. The trouble is that in the old days, when we go back a couple of years, they did spend time on the CAS sites because they didn't have a job to do. Nowadays we just go from job to job to job. So they were never getting back to those sites to be able to use those facilities. So it is a problem, and that's one of the reasons why we are able to use, or why crews are using toilets in the likes of Tesco's, because they don't have a chance to go back to the CAS points. But equally, with roughly every other job, they're ending up in hospital. Clearly, every other job, they have the opportunity to go to a toilet that's there. I mean, let's put it into perspective here as to, the chances of the crew having, downtime between it. I mean, currently, looking at, West Mercia, we currently have 41 jobs outstanding with nothing to send. So the chances of them going to have some downtime at a CAS point are 0, because they're going to get sent straight to another case. But hopefully I've picked up all your points, but I know Mark had his hand on, so you may want to add something in at this point as well.
So if I may, if I talk inappropriately, I was cut out of the conversation for a while, so I'm guessing a little bit about what was said earlier on. I think by way of just a point of detail, you referred to ambulance drivers. Our ambulance personnel are qualified clinicians who happen to drive vehicles. I think the term ambulance driver is somewhat dated and probably not appropriate. By way of some of the detail that's being discussed, Murray's absolutely right. The ambulances predominantly are on the road all of the time nowadays. It's a very different environment to what it was even 7 and 8 years ago. I mean, I did a shift out of Craven Arms not long back. We didn't actually get back to the station even for a break. We did 300 miles in total travelling, mainly between Shrewsbury and Hereford hospitals. A lot of people not being conveyed to hospital. So in September, we conveyed less than 45% of patients that had called 999. Interestingly, one of the calls that we went to when I was working out at Craven Arms was a GP referral of a patient that had had hip pain for 3 months. And the husband of this lady said, "I'll follow on in my car." So you can see some of the frustrations we've got with some of the jobs. It is the case that there are delays at hospitals. And interestingly, Murray mentioned about the halos. The commissioners in Shropshire are one of the few commissioners in the region that don't invest sufficiently in halos. In actual fact, in the baseline contracts, they commission nothing. So any halos that go in are often at our own expense. The role of the halo isn't predominantly to look after patients, but nevertheless they do that. The frustration for us isn't so much the cohorting by the halos, it's the fact that we often can't get the patient off the ambulance. It wouldn't be unusual over in Shropshire or Shrewsbury Hospital specifically to have a patient on the back of an ambulance for 7 hours or more. That's completely unacceptable, because what that does is that puts the ambulance out of service completely. We can't even, if there's an emergency around the corner, we can't even respond. And you'll probably be aware of the patient that actually was just 1.5 miles from Shrewsbury Hospital and sadly died waiting for an ambulance. And that's the problem when our ambulances are stranded at hospitals. Myself and Murray were out at a meeting in Oswestry a couple of weeks back. Half of our ambulance fleet was sat outside hospitals doing effectively nothing, not able to respond to 999 calls. That's completely unacceptable. If we had no handover delays, our response times in Shropshire and indeed in the rest of the region would be the best in the country again. If you go back probably 7 or 8 years, the average number of jobs that an ambulance did in a 12-hour period was around 8. We're currently at under 3 per 12-hour period. So the ambulance productivity has just completely dropped because of handover delays outside the 2 hospitals in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. They disproportionately represent our total delays. So although there are hospitals with greater numbers, for the size of those hospitals, they consume and waste a lot of resource. I've even taken to chairing a meeting every second Friday, looking at handover delays in the hospitals. There is a lot that can be done to improve the situation. There's a lot that can be done that's out of our control, and there's a lot that can be done if we work better together as organisations. But an example, if you take Shrewsbury Hospital, the number of people with long lengths of stay is going up. That's measured at 14 and 21 days. I don't run the hospital, I can't do anything about that, but they have to do something about it with social services, with other organisations. The other thing is, there's delays in getting patients discharged by ambulance. Often many days, patients tell us, we don't run that service. That's got to improve. Otherwise, the hospital just fills up and nothing moves through it. And that causes delays. So whilst we can take responsibility for many things, we cannot and have no authority to deal with patients who are in hospital, patients who are waiting to go out of hospital. And my belief is that that's the bit where we need to get the grip and the attention. So those are the points that I would make. I mean, we're clearly very sorry that response times are so long at the moment. We're not proud of that situation, and we do need things to be better. For what it's worth, it's not COVID. People will tell you COVID is causing this problem. It's not COVID. COVID's an excuse. I highlighted the problems initially 7 years ago, and I predicted what would happen if hospitals and other organisations didn't improve specifically the issue of patient handover delays. And we're exactly where I predicted we would be. And we've got to get organisations aligned, working in order to address that specific issue.
Thank you. Heather.
I'm not sure that.
It's your turn.
I have a number of issues here. I think actually you wouldn't be here if you'd handled the whole thing differently in the first place, because I remember being told when I said this needs to come to scrutiny that actually there was no service change or the closure of stations. Well, that may or may not be true, but the next thing I read was, oh, it's going to improve services. It was in a letter in the Star from your boss, Mr. Anthony Marsh. If actually you had raised all of your issues with us in the first place, then actually maybe people would have a little more trust. You both have heard from me over the years about ambulance response times, and as far as I can see, looking at the ambulance response times here for the rural areas, yes, they're still the same as they used to be. I regularly had people having strokes 10 years ago waiting 3 and 4 hours for an ambulance. There are a lot of issues here, and some of it will be, quite a bit of it will be the handovers at the hospital. But what I need to know is, because this is a scrutiny committee should be here to add value and should be here to actually improve things for the residents that we represent. And the residents that we represent have had a chronic service for many, many years. And you may say that's wonderful in comparison with the rest of the country. Actually, I'm not interested in the rest of the country. I'm interested in the service that the residents I represent actually get, and those across Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin. So, what can we do then to make sure that handovers happen, that actually these meetings that obviously are not achieving anything begin to achieve something, and actually that those ambulances coming into the county, which is amazing because I've got a whole range of paramedics of ours who seem to spend most of their time in the West Midlands, who tell me repeatedly they spend an awful lot of time in the West Midlands. What can we do about making sure our ambulances stay here and the West Midlands ambulances stay there? Because it's much more efficient for our staff to be here. Furthermore, we didn't need to know all of the figures around Craven Arms or Oswestry and the comings and goings, because we know full well you haven't been using those stations like that for a very long time. In fact, the Craven Arms one looks nearly derelict and the signs disappeared off it long before you actually abandoned it. So there are a whole range of issues around this, but what I'm most interested in is how we, as elected members who are accountable, can actually help you to improve that for our people, because this can't carry on, and it's something that you know that I've campaigned on for 10 years, and actually it's got worse, not better. So how can we help? And we need to be able to help, even if that's using the press or whoever.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to respond to those, and you're right, we've had much dialogue over the last decade and more. I mean, I think Mark probably set out quite clearly the areas where you can help. I mean, clearly the council has a large part to play in social care issues, and as Mark set out, hospitals have many patients who are inside hospital who need to be out of hospital, and there therefore needs to be dialogue between the hospital and the social care services to try and free that up. Now, I don't begin to even consider how difficult that is for you as a council.
Can I just come back on DTOC? Because actually DTOC, the discharge from a hospital for us in Shropshire is actually very good.
Okay.
It's really very good, and it's one of the best. So the issue therefore isn't us, it may be the hospital. Again, it isn't, it's one strand of this.
You asked me for areas that you wanted to improve. There's one of the areas. And I don't have the figures. I'm very happy to accept your view that there are few delayed transfers of care. But there clearly are, as Mark has set out, issues of hospital being able to get patients out, and that clearly is an area that needs to be improved. If I can pick up your point about the cross-border issues, I mean, there is no question. I mean, if I take September as an example, 220 crews from Shropshire did go out of area to deal with patients, but 721 came into Shropshire to deal with patients. So, there is a cross-border, and that's because we will always send the nearest available ambulance to every job. And, that's what every ambulance service in the country does, is because it's the right thing to do. You will always try and respond to patients as quickly as possible. However, having said that, we are changing our model of dispatch so that we will see a reduction in that in the coming weeks and months. And in addition to that, we are putting additional staff into Shropshire to try and make sure that we are able to get to all the jobs with Shropshire vehicles. So those are two positive things that most definitely are coming about. I mean, I'm glad that you accept that Craven Arms hasn't been used very much for a while, because that's absolutely true. And there was a cost involved in that of still having it, and that's money that can now be saved and reinvested in further ambulance shifts, more ambulances on the streets of Shropshire. Mark, I don't know whether you want to add anything further.
I don't think Mark had the conversation that actually was said, and basically Heather has said the system is constipated, how can we, as a joint HOSC, actually make what areas could we put pressure on? First and foremost, to actually allow the ambulances to release much better. And secondly, the things about discharging. We should make sure that we have a problem. You've got a problem there. You believe it's not down to the HAOs which you supply, and you shouldn't have to supply that. It should be a joint enterprise, and there should be more of them if that is going to make the situation better. And that is one area that we would certainly be putting pressure on the CCG. The second one then becomes, Mark's gone. See what here, he's gone.
I think he's just moved away from his camera for a moment.
Right?
I think he's just moved away from his camera for a moment.
Is he? Can you still hear me, Mark? Yeah. First Jane and then Heath.
I'm not sure if that's on, if you can hear me. Yeah, I wanted to ask if there were no delays at the hospitals, how many ambulances would actually be available for the patients in Shropshire? Because it's difficult for us to bottom that out when we're seeing that you've brought in the 721 in the September figures that are coming into county, and how also does paramedic support in the 99 system play into that? I think it's interesting for us to know that, where these ambulances happen to be floating around. We know that you said that they were on the road most of the time. Again, bringing up the welfare of the staff members, and also the fact that we should be looking and considering that the infection control as well, if they're using public facilities. I understood that there may be some opportunity to work with the retained fire stations in the rural areas. And I don't mean to park the vehicles up, I mean purely for staff welfare when they're out in those areas working. I just wondered if you could answer that.
Yeah, so
We'll have two questions at the same time, if you don't mind. Kate.
Thank you, and it's good to hear the acknowledgement of communication issues, because it hasn't always been easy to hear about the closures via the Shropshire Star, and that creates a lot of anxiety amongst residents as well. I'm interested in the causes of the disparity of the response times, particularly rural areas. Will the closing of these stations be affecting that?
Sorry, oh, go on, Mark. You've been read your hand
Sorry.
up, please.
I've been having some connection problems, so I've been disappearing to try and get my router sorted. So I am hearing the things. So if you don't see me, I am hearing things still. So if I can just rewind a little bit and start to answer some of the earlier points that were made, and I'll come on to some of that. So I think we have to be clear here around Shropshire performance. I've just been having a look back at pre-COVID, and Shropshire's had some of the best performance in the country as far as rural areas go. And actually for category 3 responses had some of the best performance in the region. So this idea about Shropshire not receiving a good service, I think we've got to be really, really clear here. I don't agree with that assertion, and I'm quite happy that we look at the numbers. What you do have in Shropshire, though, is you do have a rural area where we're not going to get to every patient in every postcode within the target time. And there's something of an honest conversation we've got to have here. I drive around Shropshire loads. It is a rural area where, unless you park an ambulance on every street corner, you're never ever going to get the same performance as a city area. But considering the rurality, Shropshire has experienced some very, very good performance. And if we carry on sort of arguing the numbers, we're never going to move forward. And it does distress me to hear Shropshire councillors arguing that they've not had a good service. Whether it's good enough may be a different issue, but I can take you to other parts of the country where urban areas don't get the performance that Shropshire has received. So let's not fall out over that, because it's a myth, and you're not giving the right information to the public if you say you've been badly served by West Midlands Ambulance Service. And I've got to make that point, and I will make it very, very firmly, I'm afraid. Now, we are in a situation now where performance isn't as good as we want it to be, and we've given you the reasons for that. The reasons aren't the bricks and mortar of the ambulance buildings, because as Murray said, with the number of patients waiting, the ambulance would never go back there anyway. So the idea that closing down redundant buildings is what's causing the problems, it absolutely isn't. What it allows us to do is convert any spare resource we've got into delivering more ambulances on the roads of Shropshire. And that's what we've got to focus on. We've got to focus on getting as much resource on the roads of Shropshire. And again, Murray emphasised that there's more support into Shropshire than Shropshire ambulances going out of Shropshire. So Shropshire's a net gainer in that respect. But even if we had 5 spare ambulances, for example, at the moment, where would we put them in order to get best response times? Shropshire is so rural that parking one at Craven Arms or Shrewsbury, you're never going to have enough in order to get every postcode covered. So what we've got to do in rural areas is maximise the health investment. Now, I believe if we could release the ambulance resource that's tied up at hospital, we could get most of those performance times back to where we were. I'll call it pre-COVID, although I still don't believe COVID is what's caused the problem. In order to do that, we've got to have better grip at the hospital as to getting those ambulances prioritised to get them back on the road. If half the ambulances in Shropshire are tied up at hospital, that will absolutely impact on the response times to our.
You're at the front line of dealing with the hospitals, and you're talking to them. How do we actually improve that? How do we, without debate, you know, obviously it's a two-sided debate between the hospital saying it's not us, it's whatever, and yourselves is saying it's a hospital. We know that there's a tie-up with the hospital. How do you improve that? How do you make it better? Who do we actually talk to in order to do that? And why hasn't this conversation gone on?
So the conversation does go on. I can give you an example of the meeting I held last Friday. So 6 days ago, there was one person from the hospital that attended the meeting. One person, and that was the consultant from ED, who's as frustrated as we are that they're not getting a grip of it. Now, I'm an executive director of West Midlands Ambulance Service. We cover 22 hospitals, and I put my time aside to help the hospital, but none of their staff other than the ED consultant attended that meeting. So I'm not going to solve the hospital's problems. I have no jurisdiction over it. I do know things I would do, and I've given them those ideas, and they need to be getting on and doing it. My concern with the hospital at the moment is saying that the A&E department's too small is not the right answer, because that's not going to be rebuilt in the next few months. We need an answer that solves the problem now. And I can take you to other parts of our region where, for example, if I took you to Warwick Hospital, the consultants there are fighting metaphorically over looking after our patients. They want to get out of the hospital to look after our patients before they even get into the hospital. And by that, I mean the frailty team at Warwick Hospital want to get into the patient's home and look after the patient before the ambulance even arrives. There's a really different appetite for clinical responsibility compared to what we experience in Shrewsbury. There's other areas. So if you go to North Staffordshire, which is a hugely rural area as well, they've got what's called a CRIS team, a Community Rapid Intervention Service, CRIS. They take our referrals and they go to the patient's own homes to deliver care. Conveyance in North Staffordshire for September was 37%. 2/3 of our patients we kept away from hospital by doing things like that. We haven't got anything similar to that in Shropshire, and it's about time we got these services established so that there isn't an over-reliance on the ambulance service nor the emergency department. And we've got to start to get that with some pace. You know, we're doing our best. to get things right, and we're getting frustrated with the system not working collectively to deliver some of these solutions.
Mark, it's a great shame that you were having real problems with your router and you didn't actually hear everything I said, because actually you have now answered what I asked, and we need these things written down. One of the things that I said, and I will stand by, is that for many of the rural areas, the service hasn't improved. Actually, the service from the paramedics is second to none. That's a different ballgame. That's a whole different question. And I would never criticise the ambulance crews that I've come across because they are so professional, it's unbelievable. That's not my point. And I don't think that the committee's point is around that either. What I did say is, okay, it's not working. You've told us lots of things about it, but the whole point of scrutiny is that we need to know upfront about these things and how we can actually help, because scrutiny is there to improve. And we do have the right to call everybody in front of us. We do have the right to have the press in the room, but we do need to know what we're fighting for and how we're fighting for it. So some of these things you have just mentioned were actually really useful to us all, and we need those written down so that we know where we can put pressure on and what we need to do. So thank you belatedly for all of those bits, and if you've got more interesting points, we need them so that we can do our job properly. So I am grateful that you've picked that up without even knowing what I'd said.
We have Steve Trenchard on the line. Now Steve Trenchard was in charge of the reconfiguration, and he's one of the main voices that we've been speaking to for many years, for the last couple of years. Steve, would you like to come in and answer some of the questions that you put in?
Yeah, it's a responsive thing to, I think, one of Mark's last points. So there is a place in the system, which is the Urgent Care Delivery Board, that has all the system partners on, local authorities and Dean, Sath and Mark and colleagues, and I don't think it's correct to say that the system isn't working together on this issue. I would like to say that there is a very clear improvement plan around urgent care. We all acknowledge that the performance isn't where it needs to be, and that the system has an improvement plan that's in place. The CCG is dedicated an improvement director to this area, which is Sam Tilley, who's been obviously very prominent through COVID and the whole resilience piece. I think the key thing about the CRIS model as well is we took a presentation from the CRIS team a couple of years ago, System Chief Execs did, and it's that model that is a nationally mandated model that we are rolling out. We're calling it something different, which is our rapid response model, which the system is on with rolling out again across the partnership. I agree, Mark, there's some great things that we could do differently, and they are in the improvement plan to do differently. We're completely up for innovating to get the right standards in place. We know there are challenges with the workforce, etc., but I just wanted to pick up that the system is on board and working together on this as a whole.
But Steve, while you're on,
I'm saying it, I'm just, sorry, Derek.
You're into the next one. But the reality is this, that at the present moment we have a crisis. We have an ambulances stashed up in front of our hospitals. Now the improvement plan is all very well, but we've been talking about this damned improvement plan for many, many moons now. When is it actually? Is it a financial thing that's not going into it? Is it part of the recent structure that we're waiting for the government approval? Or why are we not actually going ahead with some of those plans that, to be honest, you all want to get working, but it's still there and it's getting worse rather than better?
Yeah, I think the improvement plan is in place. We recognise the challenges that are there now, and I would fully support Mark's view that the performance isn't where it needs to be, and there is a serious group of people who are working to improve that performance, from the chief execs and the system leader Mark Brendworth, down through a team to support SAF on improving its flow, on making sure we don't have the delays. and importantly on picking people up earlier on, because it's the whole piece, isn't it? You know, keeping people away from the front door of staff is the aim of all of us, to make sure that the care happens closer to home and as early as possible. And that underpins, that philosophy and that approach underpins the redesign of all our pathways.
Could I then ask Steve, could we have a copy of that with a timeline when the various milestones are going to be reached? Because we've got winter pressures coming up, this is not going to improve, and actually we as a scrutiny committee and our public deserve to know what you're putting in place and when you're putting it in place, and what is actually stopping you in the near future. Not 3 months down the line, because we'll be well and truly into the middle of winter by that point. We need to do this now. In the next week or so, we need to have all that information and we need to look at it again.
I'm very happy to get that that plan to you.
With the timelines, with target times.
I'm very yeah, I can pick that up with the urgent care director, Sam Tilley.
But it seems strange to me, Steve, that you've got the timeline there, and yet we have got the ambulance service here who don't seem to be aware of that timeline or the improvement plan. And when they had the meeting, when they've been putting forward the concerns when they're there, that you have an A&E director rather than, you know, the improvement person in charge there. Why haven't you passed that information onto the ambulance service so you can work? I mean, it's supposed to be a joint plan. Work together. Why is it not? Why do they not know about it? Why are they on here trying to justify something that, you know, is beyond their powers?
I can't speak for the ambulance service. All I can say is that there is a plan that's overseen by the UEC delivery board. There is a working group, and the ambulance service are members of both of those groups.
Okay. Mark, have you got any comments?
So I think the issue from our point of view isn't whether there's a plan. I mean, anyone can have a plan. The issue is, what difference is things making? Because I think, Chair, you made the point, we're heading for winter very rapidly. I think we're not far off 2 months away from Christmas, that we're on a burning platform that's getting narrower and narrower, but a situation that's getting worse. So to some extent, even if there is a plan, it can't be the right plan if it's not getting the traction and the improvements it needs. I think that's the point. And the hospital handover meeting that I mentioned about being chair of, I didn't set that up. You know, I didn't even agree to chair it, but I'm quite happy to do so. But I do want people to attend and do things, you know, and that clearly isn't happening.
Heath?
Yeah, just coming back on.
Yeah, sorry, that's an old hand.
So coming back on the question I asked earlier, my question was, does the closing of the hubs make a difference to time in the response time in rural areas? And I think the reply I got was no, it doesn't. So what can be done, or is anything being done? Is the reply you're giving saying nothing can really be done about improving response times in rural areas, or is there something that could be done to improve them?
Happy, if I could have a pop at that one. I'm sorry we didn't quite get to answer your question. So I think the simple answer is by closing the CAS points, we should see an improvement in response time, simply because we're putting more resource, effectively putting more resource into the system. So effectively you're putting, because you're losing a minimum of 3 hours a day for CAS sites, that's 12 hours of additional ambulance time into the system. So that's an extra crew during the day, every day that you've got in Shropshire. So, you know, depending on how much time they spend at the hospital, they should get more patients simply from that. Equally, the money that we save from closing them will allow us to put more resource into Shropshire. But, you know, as we stand at the moment, we've got one crew that's been at Princess Royal Hospital for 217 minutes. We just had 2 crews clear at Royal Shrewsbury. They've been there for 290 minutes. That's the issue that you've got. I mean, we've got 10 ambulances sat between the 2 hospitals as we speak. There's another 3 en route. So that's the reality of what we face every day. If I can come back to one point though about the rurality that Heather raised, and I have to go back a good few years, but it's to shop the PCT, who did ask the question is, what additional resource would you need to hit the response times in every area? And the answer was that you need to double our workforce and increase the fleet by 2/3. That's the level of additional resource that you would need. And even if you did do that, you'd still not hit it because you get 2 jobs in Bishop's Castle in the same, in the same hour, just because that's the way it happened. But I can see Heather itching to come back on me on that one, so I'll let you do so.
I was definitely there when you did that. It was part of our scrutiny process. I have a long memory, but actually at that point, the PCT did say it was going to come up with some extra funding. So my question is, did they?
No.
So we now have an extra player in the ring because they did promise at that point, and I think it was Dr. Julie Davis that actually said that, they actually agreed that they would put some more resources in because response times were very much the same. So you're telling me that didn't happen. So we now got an issue with the hospital, an issue with the CCG or the PCT as it was, and we have an ambulance service saying it's not USCO. So actually, it brings me back to my original point, is we need all of you to be in a room making sure these things improve. There will always be things that the ambulance service can do for themselves, and it isn't all down to the hospitals. The hospitals, just a minute, the hospitals have not delivered. I completely accept that, and that is the as scrutiny, we need all of you to move that on because winter pressures are really, really significant. So that brings me back to Steve. So why is it that everything is so slow? Why is it that we're not actually delivering the plan? And is it the right plan? And is it down to finance? The bold question of cuts or finance, please, because we're not going to progress this to do anything for our residents unless we can get to the bottom of it all.
There's an improvement plan for the improvement plan. But before you do answer that, Jane.
Yeah, sorry to come back. Yeah, I don't think you actually answered anything to do with the staff welfare, which I raised earlier. And I did want to touch on that because we do have to bear in mind there is issues perhaps with infection control. We can't expect our ambulance staff to be sort of marooned in the rural area and end up with no facilities. I mean, I do want to labour the point. What is being done about that? Staff will find themselves on the road in the rural areas. As you said, it's a large area of Shropshire. What can we do? Because I do know that there are facilities dotted around the more rural areas of Town Station that I believe have been offered.
Yep, so if I can pick that one up. And
Before you do, I'd just like to highlight a couple of things that we need to actually to sort of home in some of the areas. And that is certainly, there's an improvement plan. Mark, what part of the improvement plan have you? You've told us you've got some solutions, you've got ideas, you've got thoughts about how we can make things better. How are you feeding this into the improvement plan? Is it being acknowledged? Are you part of that improvement plan? Because you're obviously at the front line, you should be very much a part of that. The other one, Steve, is this down to finance? When is the improvement plan actually? When are we going to take it off the paper and actually start doing something? Because this improvement plan's been, it's been floating about for quite a long time. We really need to see action rather than words.
So just in comment to that, Chairman, I think Steve's right, there is an improvement plan, but what we've got is we've got some fairly pragmatic things that need to be done. So, for example, the consultant in the ED said it's a small ED, it's not fit for purpose, but still a number of other specialties use it as a point of entry for their patients, for them to be examined. So my comment on that to the consultant in ED is just tell them to stop it. So then it raises another issue. Well, where do they do those examinations? Well, that's not the issue for that group. They need to find somewhere other than the ED. If the ED is too small for working as an ED, it can't then be doing other things as well. Now, in my world, that would take a day to agree that and sort it. 2 weeks on, there's still a discussion, well, how do we do it? And to this day, that issue is still happening. So I think it just needs a little bit more focus and pragmatism in order to be getting quick results. Now, they might not be the ideal ones, and we know from experience that the problem with making quick decisions is sometimes you don't communicate them in the way that everyone feels involved with the decision. So, but there are things that need to be done, and it needs to be now, this month, not in the future, if you see what I mean, because so many things are going to deliver in the future, but we're not going to get through the winter unless we start to take some big, pragmatic, brave decisions. And we need people as well behind us, because the other thing I think we need, and I'm happy to sort of talk about it, we do need the public to be behind us, because there are 3 areas where we think, or I think, there's improvements that we can make. The first is we need to stop people being as reliant on the ambulance service as what they are. We know from experience we get people calling that could use other services, for example. We also need the public to help us, you know, by way of first response. Murray talks a very convincing argument about the public helping with basic life support, early defibrillation. And then the third thing is we need communities that are looking after the frail elderly people. Because I know, for example, over Christmas, we'll get people on Boxing Day that are so unwell. If only we could have got to them 2 days sooner, we'd have stood a better chance at helping them. And we need people to be knocking on doors, checking the elderly are warm, hydrated, okay, got the shopping in. I know probably more of that happens in Shropshire than some of the areas we've got. But when we get to some of the frail elderly people, they're so unwell, they end up going into hospital when actually an earlier intervention would have prevented that. So I don't know, Murray, if you want to comment, because you're much more better at describing some of these things than I am.
I'll do my best. Can I just, I'm sorry, I don't know the councillor's name who's raised it twice about facilities and all the rest of it. Can I do that one first, just to make sure?
Yeah, Jane Greenaway.
that we do get that one. So yeah, Shropshire Fire Service did put a press release out saying that they were offering our help. We haven't actually got any agreement or anything like that, so that came as a little bit of a surprise. But yeah, clearly it's helpful if the fire service would like to let us use their facilities. We don't actually know how that would work, but I'm sure a conversation could happen on that. As I say, you know, crews do end up at hospital roughly every other job. So there are facilities obviously there, and as you say, you know, there are facilities in publicly accessible places. The crews all carry alcohol gel with them at all times. They have obviously other infection prevention and control methods with them at all times. I think one of the other things that somebody, and I'm sorry I didn't catch who it was, said, you know, what's the ambulance service doing about it? And I just wanted to, you know, we did put it into one of the papers that we submitted to you about the clinical validation team. So this is a group of paramedics who are working in our control rooms to try and identify as many patients as possible, that so we can reduce the number of times that ambulances go out to patients. And you know, for the first month that it was in operation, the clinical validation team of paramedics looked at 20,000 cases, and in 12,000 of those cases they were able to stop the ambulance going. And that was through a combination of things like providing just clinical advice over the telephone. It was making appointments for people to go to same-day emergency care appointments at hospitals, but without needing to go via the ED department. Equally, it was referring them into a GP or bringing one of the community services in to do that. And we've seen the number of our hear and treat rate go from about 4% up to 15, 16, 17%. So we are doing quite a lot ourselves to try and reduce the strain on hospitals. If I can turn to the point that Mark made, and this is about defibrillation, and this is something that, you know, the council absolutely could make a real impact on, and that is about helping to spread the knowledge around CPR. So I'm sure you probably all know that if you have a cardiac arrest outside hospital at the moment, your chance of survival is 7%, which is pretty appalling, quite frankly. However, if you go to Denmark, it's 25%. And the simple reason for that is that Denmark for many years has been teaching school kids how to do CPR, and I'm very glad that it is now part of the national curriculum, and that's fantastic news. But equally, we need all the adults to know how to do CPR. It doesn't take, but it makes such a big difference. So that when a patient goes into cardiac arrest, for every minute that nobody's doing CPR, your chance of survival drops by 10%. So even if we do get to that case in a rural area in 7 minutes, as we're supposed to in 50% of occasions, well, if nobody's been doing CPR, 70% of that patient's chance of survival has gone. And given you only had an 80% chance of surviving anyway, we're down to 10%. So by getting more defibrillators in the rural areas and more people knowing how to do CPR, we undoubtedly will save more lives. And I think just one other point about the defibrillator. So when a call comes in to say there's a cardiac arrest, our dispatch system will automatically identify any defibrillator within 200 meters of that patient's location. Now, we know of roughly about 5,000 defibrillators across the region, but clearly, that's a tiny number compared to the size of the region that we're in. And, particularly, I'm sorry to pick on you, Heather, again, Bishop's Castle and that area. I mean, I don't know how many defibs there are at Bishop's Castle, but you effectively need a defibrillator every 400 meters to make sure that we can always find one. And if we've got more defibrillators, then we will save more lives.
Right, I would love to come back, Murray, because as usual, you're really good at doing the positive story. Even if you use a defib, you still need an ambulance.
Oh, absolutely.
So this is a side issue, actually. It's not what we're really talking about, and it is a really good example of what communities can do. But you'll find that across Shropshire, and virtually all my villages have got them, if not two. Old phone boxes have got them in, loads of people have done the training, I've done the training, I used to teach it in school. So, it's still there, and an awful lot of people do. This is a side issue. When somebody has a heart attack, they still need an ambulance. So we need to get back to what we're doing, which is, yes, the council can help, but I think we can help more than anything here to get you all talking to one another, do something positive and let our residents know what it is they're going to expect to get the ambulance wait times down and to actually improve what's going on at the hospital. But also, there's the funding issue, which rears its head again. There are a whole range of things, but there was a whole piece on education that you talked about, Mark, which I think is really important. We are not doing that education out there at the present time in a sort of way we should. I was in Cambridge at the weekend, working with Cambridge County Council. And actually on television, they were doing a whole lot on local television about when to call an ambulance and when not to call an ambulance and so on. And we don't seem to be doing that here at the present time. You might get a little bit in the Star, not everybody gets the Star. You might hear some on Radio Shropshire, which you do from time to time, but it's much bigger than that. And it's actually doing stuff properly on Facebook. It's about using your Shropshire councillors to get the education out there. We have virtually no direct contact with the ambulance service or anybody else. The best contact I have with the ambulance service is the very many paramedics who do my division or outside my division that I come across. So there are lots of things we can do, but the most important thing we do now is have a real plan with some times on it.
But we also need to ask the question, do you think the reason you're having the lateness of the calls is because of the failure of primary care? Because there has been a huge inability for anyone to see their local doctor. Is this an additional pressure that's causing your increased screen calls at a later stage rather than being able to be detected earlier?
So if I may answer that, and I just want to also make a point about response times. So if I just talk about response times first, then I'll go on to that latter bit. And I've just been looking at some of our response times over the years, and I think for places like Shropshire, we just need to be really, really careful, because if you take September 2019, which is the comparator, we try not to use last year as a comparator because last year was such an unusual year, but September 19, we may not have been hitting the targets, but we were only a few minutes off. And if you think of something, so if you take the category 2, 18-minute mean average, we were at 21. 3 minutes for someone with a stroke or a heart attack isn't really going to make that much difference. The critical bit there is that we're arriving with a transporting vehicle and getting the patient to definitive care quickly, which, if you remember, before we had the new response targets, a first responder, for example, may have stopped the clock. So I think even where we don't hit the targets, we've got to be realistic as to what is achievable. The other thing is, for category 3 in September 2019, we were getting there in an average of 50 minutes, where the target's 2 hours. So Shropshire was getting probably one of the best response times in the whole of the country on that one. And that would be, for example, frail elderly falls. So I think we have been in a good place, and I think we've got to aim to get back to that good place. I think as far as primary care goes, I need to be very careful how I say this, because if you take our activity at the moment, our activity year on year generally goes up by about 4 to 5%. So we'll call it 4.5%. If you take the last 2 years, it's been a bit unpredictable across the years, but broadly speaking, the activity's gone up in the way that it probably would have gone up even if COVID hadn't happened. What we get is we get anecdotes from patients that they have difficulty accessing primary care. But then we also have patients that say they've not tried to access primary care. So it seems that patients fall into 2 groups: the ones that have tried and not got the responsiveness or the type of response they want. And then there's others who make an assumption about how accessible primary care is and therefore don't try. So maybe they call 111 and get an ambulance, or maybe they call 999 and get an ambulance. I think whatever the issue, I think more accessible primary care would certainly help, because there are a group of patients that undoubtedly are of the urgent primary care type where they could be best served in primary care. So I hope I haven't dodged the question. I've tried to be fair to our primary care colleagues, because I do know the pressures they're under as well.
Right, I need to ask anyone else got any questions, comments? Okay.
What I'd really like to know, both from Steve Trenchard and from Mark.
Well, I'm going to summarise that.
Okay, is what's going to happen now, and when is it going to happen, and when are you actually going to do something, and what are the quick wins? Because that's what Scrutiny is here for.
Yeah, I was going to summarise. Look, I want to thank you very much indeed. I think firstly, what we hope that you'll be doing as soon as possible is for you to contact the ambulance, contact the fire service. I mean, it doesn't take a lot. The offer that I saw on the table was about a couple of weeks ago.
And before, they don't.
And before, yeah, and really, it just takes a phone call and to sort something up for the ambulance crews. And I'm quite sure that would come as a welcome to all of us. That's in the welfare side. I think we need this improvement plan. We want to know a timetable, we need to know a schedule, and we don't want to know when implementation. And Mark, sorry, is it Mark? It is Mark, isn't it? Yeah, it is Mark. Mark, you have got these plans. We'd really like to know, are they listening to you who's on the front line, and is it a part of the improvement plan? And as you rightly say, that has got to be done quickly. What we need to know very, very quickly is, if not, why not?
There's one last thing that I know is worrying some of my colleagues, which is the Millbraes ambulance station, because it's in a very congested part of Shrewsbury. We were originally told a long time ago that actually it wouldn't be there, it would be more accessible to the A5, which would have been sensible. But now we've got, I know, something like 300 houses being built there. You've got 2 secondary schools, and the access and the ability to get out in a hurry there is poor. And I think that may also help your response times if we can look at what can be done about the siting of that particular ambulance station.
So again, just to summarise, I haven't heard anyone saying that they're concerned with the closure of the stations that have been specified. It is about having more ambulances out on the roads working together and not sitting in hospital bays. And it is also about the siting of this one station. Look, can I think that's the summary that I'm putting forward, and that is the area that hopefully will come back again in a couple of months' time to see exactly where we are. Can I thank you very, very much, all of you for taking part in this debate, and again, we're going to be looking for improvements, and we will be making comments regarding, and we want to see people not sitting outside hospitals, but actually on the streets picking up the patients in there. And if the clogging of the hospital comes, that will be something we'll pick up with the hospitals and the CCG and the 3CT. Yeah.
Is there a chance then that we have a date to have a lot of feed through for this, and if and a special meeting if we need one? But we do need some dates because it will just drag on.
Heather, we have to arrange it with the rosters because it's also, we're talking about congestion. You should see how plugged up he is.
It may be, it's just that this is so important, it's a life and death issue.
I absolutely accept it, yeah. If not, then we'll get a written report, okay? But thank you very much indeed for your attendance at today's meeting. And we'll now move on to the next item. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, councillors and Chair, for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chair.
Yep.
Sorry, just you sort of dashing off to Lorna there, just to sort of reassure you that Lorna and I will meet on Monday. We both furiously take notes. So Lorna and I will have a conflab, share our notes, determine the sort of actions that have sort of by there, and then we'll put those back to you just to make sure that we keep momentum going so that it doesn't end here, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure that they knew what we wanted.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. End of life care. Hey? You happy now? Thank you. We've got Steve today on the end of life care, have we?
Yes, we've got Steve Trenchard and Derek Willis.
Thank you.
I think they're both here.
Derek here? Hello, Derek. How are you doing?
I've been hiding during that conversation, so I've.
It's always chuck Steve under the bus.
I have to say, I'm mildly worried now about presenting to you all.
Carry on, Derek.
So I'm going to start, and then Steve's going to take over towards the end. Just to explain who I am. My name's Professor Derek Willis, and it's my great pleasure and joy to be Medical Director of Severn Hospice. For about 4 years now, I've been chair of the End of Life group for Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, and that's something that the hospice very kindly allows me to do. What the End of Life group is, it's a collection of representatives from the various clinical places and stakeholders throughout the region. Basically, we all wanted to get together to make End of Life care as good as we could possibly make it. So the End of Life group has representation from care homes, from Shropdock, from the community trust, from the mental health services, from the hospice, and from the hospital. So, and also from RJH, Gabowen or Oswestry, whichever name you want to give to the hospital. We've met bi-monthly and looked at ways of improving end-of-life care within the region as a whole, tried to make things standard across what we do in each organisation, and worked as representatives in each of our various organisations to try and bring about change. During COVID, we basically met fortnightly as COVID and the palliative care and end of life issues really came to the fore. First of all, just as peer support for each other, but also just to see what we could do about trying to improve things and making sure that we kept people at home as much as we could, and that we were educating people about what end of life care looked like for patients with COVID. We then went to the ICS stroke CCG to say, look, we're doing really good pieces of work here, but sometimes it feels like we're speaking and no one's really hearing us. We kind of want the official channels really to give this a little bit more clout, and the ICS have very kindly said, yes, we want you as part of the group. So we now feed into the ICS, which is why you now have the strange double act of Steve and I coming and talking. So this, I guess, is really on the back of 2 years. I came to speak to you about a document called the respect document. And it was a very nice meeting because basically you turned around to me and said, why haven't we been doing this before? Which whenever you're going to a meeting worried about what people's response is, that's the response you want. And very much your response to this particular document was go out and make sure that we're doing it. So I wanted to kind of basically reassure you that the respect document has been brought in, and also just to explain to you that those who weren't around or can't remember 2 years ago, because a lot has happened, hasn't it, about what the respect document is and where we've gone next with the respect document. Then Steve's going to talk a little bit about more the system-wide changes and things that we're working on as a partnership. So whoever's moving the slides, would you be able to move to the next one for me, possibly?
I'm trying.
I can cover if you need me to. So that's basically what I've just told you. So if we move on to the next one. So the respect form, what was the respect form all about? 3 or 4 years ago, if you had filled in a DNA CPR document, so DNA CPR document is basically saying that for particular patients, if you tried to do cardiopulmonary resuscitation mouth to mouth, that this would not work in that particular patient. So it's generally those people who have end stage disease, whereas clinicians and as the patient, we are saying, actually, if we do this, this isn't going to work. Actually, you don't want us to move you to hospital, or you don't want us to kind of involve high level medical intervention because it's not in your interest, it's not going to work. We can write a piece of paper which says this. So obviously when you are unable to tell us, we know that we can respect your wishes. What used to happen in Shropshire was that you had a different form for this depending on where you were at. So if you're in a hospital, there was a particular DNA CPR form. And then if you went home, you had to have a different DNA CPR form filled in. So it meant that you went home and then a GP was having to run out and fill in a different form. And the form that had been filled in the hospital wasn't being respected. What I asked you is if we could actually make it that there was the same form that applied whichever situation you found yourself in. So if it was filled in a hospital, this would follow you and the form would be respected where you went. And you said, go away and do it. So we did. And now every hospital, healthcare setting, nursing home, GP surgery uses this particular form. And it has made such a difference to patient care because we're not having to have the repeat conversations, and also this form has been respected when it's being filled in. How can I tell you that? Well, an external agency just looked at the hospital and looked at the proportion of people who had end-of-life care within the hospital. So all people who came in who had end-of-life care, we found that 60% of them had a respect form filled in, which is a huge improvement on what it was before, where it's around about 30–40%. Not only that, the next bit that I wanted to report to you is that we were getting complaints about the respect form. And the complaints were that it wasn't detailed enough and it didn't have other bits and pieces and information that other people would have found helpful. So what do I mean by that? All the respect form tells you is that if your heart stops beating, that you would not want me to resuscitate you. And that's literally all the respect form does. But obviously there are an awful lot of other conversations that go on when someone's approaching the end of life about what their preferences should be. These might be, do you want to die at home? These might be, if you develop a chest infection, would you want us just to use oral antibiotics, or do you want to have IV antibiotics where you would need to go into hospital? How far do you want us to investigate you? So the posh term for this is sealing of care. And sealing of care is not within the respect document. So where sealing of care comes in is those people who've got a chronic condition who know that kind of things are going to get worse and have some idea of some of the things that might be offered to them in the future. So for example, that might be someone with motor neuron disease. So someone with motor neuron disease will know that at some point they might not be able to swallow, and that for certain people we'll be able to offer them what's called a PEG, an artificial tube that connects the outside to their stomach, which we can feed them with. With a sealing of care document, what we can do is have a discussion to say, if you reach the point where you're unable to swallow, is a PEG something that you would want us to do? And for some patients, that's very much yes. And for other patients, that's very much no. But this piece of paper that we wanted to produce would be able to record that, so we could have documentation of where patients had reached with that. So can we go to the next slide, please? So I've given you kind of goods. The not good is that it's not an advanced care plan. And this is what I want to kind of go on to describe to you next. So if we could go on to the next slide from there. So what advanced care plans are, and please note, it's not advanced. So advanced says it's something better than something. An advanced care plan is me making decisions about what my future care could look like. We looked at other advanced care plan documents and said, look, we're pushing against an open door. We have got people who are asking for something more than respect. So we need to start looking at building on our knowledge of how we produced respect and put it through, but then looking what the good advanced care plans are and trying to make one which is Shropshire friendly. So we got people who had experience of teenage patients where these kind of advanced care plans are used, patients with a neurology background, patients from people from a hospice background, and we came together with a particular document. We trialed it, used it for 3 or 4 months, and we had to stop the trial because people were using it outside of the trial because it was so good. We now have an advanced care plan document, which is the Shropshire ICS advanced care plan document, which is the same wherever you're at within Shropshire. So if it's written in the hospital, this will be accepted when you go home. I can't tell you how excited and impressed I am by this. For someone who's a palliative care consultant, documenting and having conversations with patients is the bread and butter of my job. And the frustrating thing is when those conversations aren't carried through. What we're imagining at the minute is that this is a piece of paper, a little bit like what ladies who are pregnant carry through with their pregnancy record, and then what they carry through with their kind of children's record. We know that patients have got real investment in this kind of thing and carry that with them. So at the minute, they are the ones that hold on to this and we're advising that they tell their relatives where this at. So if they reach the point where they're able to talk, there's this document which can help the clinician that's turning up to someone's house to help out. There's lots of other things that we've done over the past 3 or 4 years, but I really wanted to highlight those two because, as I say, we've kind of got history of talking about this, but also I kind of think that this is a huge achievement for Shropshire. And the other thing I wanted to say to you all is that sometimes Shropshire, I think we just are really good at telling ourselves of what we're not doing. I kind of wanted to come along and tell you something that we are doing, and actually we are in advance of other regions, particularly in the West Midlands, who do not have this document. And the document that we've written is being looked at from the rest of the West Midlands, and people are looking to use it. So I can't pretend that everything's rosy with end of life care. It's not. There are still things that we need to do, but this is a huge start and something that we've been talking about for years, and we've finally grasped the nettle and done it. So I'm now going to hand over to, I don't know, do people want to take questions at the end, or kind of, because I'm now going to hand over to Steve, which is the easiest way for.
Do it at the end.
Okay, I'm going to hand over to Steve.
Thanks, Derek. Derek, just to acknowledge your leadership around this, I think it's we're really lucky as a system to have you in this space doing that for us and put that on public record.
Thank you.
So this is a follow-up to I think a conversation that happened around about 12 months ago, I think it was, with Tracy Jones, one of my colleagues in the commissioning team, that was then taken up. The work was taken up by Alison. So Tracy pulled together an approach to review our end-of-life care and pulled together a group of people who had experience of caring for loved ones and relatives and family members at home, and not in all instances had positive experiences, and we wanted to capture that and make improvements. So she pulled together a group of people, and there were 2 things that were done. One was identifying a thematic review, and then through a piece of a sort of a research methodology, identify 4 themes. So next slide, please. Yeah, so the 4 themes that we wanted to focus on are these, which is how do we ensure that everyone knows how to access information? How do we support staff to better recognise end-of-life care? how do we ensure that people who aren't specialists in palliative and end-of-life care can get the right information, have the right conversations, and how do we more proactively identify anticipatory care needs within the last 12 months of life to ensure that people are both living as well as they can and are in charge as much as possible and in control of the processes around them, rather than getting to the end point where everything moves into a panic. And Derek's talked about some of the forms to do that. This piece of work was more around understanding the elements of how we get services more integrated, how we promote confidence in the workforce, how we get the right training and skills in place, etc. So next slide, please. The governance of this, and just to say something about the governance, the CCG as a system, and Derek's already talked about the regional group. We sit as part of a regional network. Palliative and end-of-life care is a nationally mandated NHS England improvement piece of work that attracts investment for training and new service provision, and there is a maturity assessment and an expectation increasingly, particularly as the CCGs move to closure and become an integrated care system, that there is a clear line of sight and good governance up to the ICS board. So there is an expectation that along, as you've just heard with the conversation around urgent emergency care, that the end of life pathways have as much focus and are as important to the system leadership in order to get the right attention and focus. Next slide, please. So the priorities that were identified are set out in the governance group. There are 3 task and finish groups that have leadership around them. One is growing conversations. This is about ensuring that we are having an open and accessible conversation with citizens and with our workforce. The second is around refreshing pathways, and this is about making sure that all of our pathways, all age pathways, from primary care, ensuring that we've got good palliative care registers, through to our oncology pathways, through to our children's pathways, working into our care home sector, that the various pathways are as aligned and joined up as they can be. And then the last one is very much about the workforce and skills offer. So these groups have been meeting over the last 12 months or so, predominantly under the leadership of Alison Massey, and they've been tasked with answering the questions that are outlined at the bottom. So next slide, please. So some of the key actions, I think, in these, and Derek's just talked about some of the documentation that's in place, and it's correct that there is good improvement in place, but it's also correct, and it wouldn't be prudent of me to say otherwise, that there are lots of things that we need to continue to do. There are lots of improvements that we need to continue with. Not least are having some very clear standards, having a very clear joined up strategy for the whole system, having a very clear improvement plan, not just within each organisation, but as the system expects and begins to work more as a whole, that we've got that integration piece across, working to one particular approach, one offer, one workforce offer, one conversation, as I've alluded to. So that's key. There's also, we're seeing new roles in other parts of the country, particularly around end-of-life care coordinator roles and end-of-life skill sets and competencies. So we're also looking to bring those in as well. And often I think the ability to contact services, particularly with a dedicated resource, is something that we recognise for families and carers. That's come up in a number of our reviews and on our serious instance. And indeed, there was a report done by an external agency called the Nhs report that identified some significant learning that the system could do in relation to this area. So again, there are key things that we need to take forward that we will be putting in place in a system strategy. And then I think finally there's a recognition in primary care that, you know, the best, highest performing systems all have end of life care registers. They are have very clear expectations that our district nursing and community teams are in conversations with people in that last year of life, and that there is a consistency amongst this community team working. At the moment, we've got some pockets of good practice and areas of improvement. So we can't say, and in any health service, clinical variation is always an issue that you're trying to manage, whether it's in mental health or end of life or cancer. And we want to ensure that all of our practices and all of our areas are at the top of the license. So, you know, that we've got the best offer for people across all those pathways. Next slide, please. Yeah, key to the increase in the confidence and skills, I think, is about it's about the confidence framework, but it's about having the ability for workers wherever they are in people's life, and not just specialist palliative life, end of life specialists, is about having the confidence to begin that conversation. And I think, Derek, I think it ends earlier, and this is obviously something that's personal to all of us. You know, I recently had the conversation with my folks around where, and it was fascinating, the response around where, you know, where my parents would like to rest when they die, where they'd like to be buried or cremated, and unknowns to me, and I'm 54, my dad tells the story of his parents who, back in the 50s when his dad died, bought a grave for 3 people, expecting that, and his mum and dad lied there, and only one person, sorry, his dad lies there, only one person used that plot, and my mum and dad wanted to lie there. Now, if I hadn't started the conversation, I would never have known that. So I think it's you know, having the conversations and having the confidence for those conversations is really critical, and never mind getting into then the elements of the decisions about your actual healthcare. So you know, as Freud would say, sex and death are the sort of taboo things that people shy away from talking about. So I think there is a cultural shift to get the workforce more generally confident in this area. I think the other thing around this is at the PCN level, as the PCNs emerge and the MDTs emerge around this, is just being really clear on where those training needs happen, and again, just wanting to join up conversations as we put into place new teams, rapid response teams, and we invest more in the community space, and we bring more people in. You know, we know that workforce in our system is a challenge. Having the opportunity, including for our volunteers, to get the right training, to give them that confidence, is going to be critical. So that will feature as a key development need. Next slide, please. Yeah, so growing the conversation is a more general conversation around the general population. So this is about how we link into to media outputs and publicity generally, how we ensure that we are more open about these things. In the same way, I think, and we see improvements in dementia awareness, we see improvements in mental health discussions and emotional resilience. In the same way, we want to use these 2 events here, so grief awareness and Dying Matters events, to promote a healthy conversation across our communities. Next slide, please. Okay, so this just summarises some of the key next steps and work that's underway. So as I've alluded to, we will be pulling together a strategy. Interestingly, on our assessment of our strategy, the feedback from NHSEI is that we, as a system, we need to strengthen the system understanding and leadership around this element of end of life care, and that's notwithstanding the great work that Derek and colleagues have done. The challenge to us as a system is, so where does it sit in your governance, and do people really understand it, apart from those that are really passionate about it? And Derek and I have had a couple of conversations about this, and we're really keen to provide the right sort of governance. I mean, governance is probably the wrong word for this, but the right platform in which this work can have the right profile. So that's going to be critical to that. So this slide just sort of outlines some of the key pieces of work and development that we'd expect to be in place following the review process. So next slide, please. So I'm not going to talk to all of this, but what we've attempted to do here is to identify some of the answers in relation to the questions in the phase 1 review. And we think we're well on track with creating the answers. I think, you know, if Alison was here, she'd be saying how well that group is working. She'd also say that it's been probably a difficult journey for some people in that group, not least because this is a very emotive subject, and I think there are some learnings for us in how we do co-production in this particular area, and not just for palliative care, but probably broadly across lots of other our areas as well. And that's making sure that there's the right support for people, you know, when we come to understand some of the conversations, and that people aren't triggered, and that there's the right sort of support for people in there. We touched up again, just joining the conversations, we touched earlier on about the workforce resilience, and our workforce through this period has been both exemplary, but is now at a stage of, I think, probably almost complete exhaustion and fatigue with COVID. And as a system, we've invested in over. Sorry about this. I've got a dog. Go on out. Derek will remember my dog Charlie barking in the background from our weekly calls.
I was going to say that wasn't me making any comments.
Yeah, as a system, we've invested in what's called a TRIM, which is a trauma-informed conversation for people, and actually our fire service are like the most exemplary public body that have done this, and we've trained up people from the fire service, from the police service, from our various health partners, and linked it to the emotional health and wellbeing hub, which MPFT run for us, the Mental Health Trust. And that's it's a structured conversation for people who may have been had a one-off adverse incident that they found traumatic, or that they've been exposed to several potentially traumatic instances over a period, and that's proven really good for people. The next slide, please. Yeah, so in relation to this this particular one, so the task and finish groups have tried to answer this in a couple of ways. One is around the competency framework, and one is around the standards. And I think one of the things that we're identifying, particularly with some of our workforce, is probably a misunderstanding between anticipatory care planning and then respect care planning. So actually having the confidence to have the conversations much earlier in that last year of life, and rather than the last minute when things get into crisis and urgent care domain, and last minute decisions that are being made. So I think that's one of the key things that's identified, and then that links into that broader conversation around growing the conversation with the workforce and the population on the choices that you can make in that last year of life. So next slide, please. In this workshop around the developing the skills, particularly for our generic workforce, again, the standards for adult care are showing that there are key things that we can do on that, and we would be bringing that training online. Again, you know, if you were to say when is that training going to come in, I couldn't speak with that knowledge at the moment. What we want to do is to share the feedback of this review process. Do a little bit more consultation, that the answers seem to be the right things to people, so that there's a good, you know, and that obviously leads the modelling and the way of having that open conversation with people, and then we'll take that to the system palliative and end of care life group to provide to get some of the expertise around the actions and plans that need to be in place, and obviously that's working through each of our providers. Has senior responsible officers for end of life care, so that's working with those clinicians and system leaders in the provider space to make sure that we are getting that training into all of the various components and the right pathways in their organisations. And the next slide, please. Okay, so again, this is similar to the other in relation to our phase 1, and this is particularly around care needs. I've probably spoken to some of this, particularly in how we get the confidence to use some of those documents. So yeah, I'm happy. Let's move on to the next one, please. So I think some of the key learning, just to share something from sort of Alison's and the group's reflections. I think one of the key things is that co-production as an approach does take time. I think the system, as the CCG comes to a close, there's a group called the Assuring Involvement Committee, and there is a complete commitment from the ICS Shadow Board to do co-production, but it does take a little bit longer. The other thing is that, and I've touched on the third point about personal stories, is that time is needed for people to talk and then process and reflect and get the right support. And you know, I think if you're working in this space, and again, we've got a slightly different approach across the providers. Generally, you wouldn't ask someone to be involved until there's a couple of anniversaries are passed from the passing of their loved one. I think we've probably engaged with some people a bit early, and that's been quite difficult and emotive. So that's key learning for us. And similarly, I've experienced this in the mental health space as well. You know, sometimes talking about stuff can bring back very powerful emotions, and we just need to be sensitive to that in that co-production space. I think the other thing is that the way the governance group has been set up, there has been some crossover. And often you don't realise this until you start setting groups up. So the crossover, I think, is being managed through up into the overarching group to make sure that the duplication is understood and the right conversation is happening in the right place. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think I've alluded to this, which is that the end of life care review, they're almost at the point of broader consultation on the work that they've done. Critical to that, I think, will, as I've said, bring it back to the end of life steering group, as that will then have to go through the various elements of governance in the system, and in each of the providers as well. Once we've done that bit of work and then we've got that sort of endorsement from that wider piece of engagement, we'd be very happy to bring that back for further consideration to the joint HOSC. Thank you. And I apologise for my dogs in the background again.
No, yes, Heath. Like everything else, Steve, it's about consultation. What I haven't noticed is that you're going to the wider view of asking all the organisations who are involved in dealing with people with cancer, with all the life-threatening long-term illnesses where, you know, they've got very little ability to survive. It's how do we actually get that? I mean, you know that we've been talking now for a long time, and what we need in the NHS is a standard form of consultation of how we talk to, how they're addressed, making sure that we have a proper format laid out, that rather than the random tick boxes at the present moment, that, oh, we've consulted and talked to half a dozen people. That don't work. We need a proper consultation process. And that should be certainly before it actually finishes going through the process. So you've got the feedback from all the different people.
Can I just talk to that? As I'm trying to explain, the end of life group has all those people on it. So the questions have been generated from the end of life group. There isn't an organisation that's not represented, and very much it's made clear that the responsibility of that person sitting on our committee is that they feed back into where they've come from. And actually, they're responsible for starting to work out how those changes could come about. So that's kind of almost why we had a victimless revolution with bringing respect in, because all the people that needed to be around the table were there, and all the people that wanted to bring about change were there. So what's happened is these questions have been generated from that group, and then the answers to the questions, or some of the ideas behind the answer to the questions, will be fed back into that group, and then it'll be looked at how that can be rolled out across the various organisations that are there. So I think you're absolutely right that generally this is a problem. I would say this, wouldn't they? But I want to say that actually for this group, it isn't, because we've made sure that the right people are there. And actually not just the right people, the people that want to bring about change, who aren't just happy having a meeting and then that's it. They want to have a meeting and then bring the change in, because we see the difference that good end of life care can make for patients and families.
I think there's also the ability to actually do something probably fairly revolutionary for the NHS. Let's do something like a YouTube video, so if people can do the things in the right, because one of the most difficult conversation really is not so much with the professional and the patient, it's the patient and the family. It's the most difficult question. It's how we actually do that within that comfort of the home, without, you know, having the professionals there, but actually so they can look at something and say, yeah, this is what we really need to explore. We're coming to that then.
Can I just answer that as well? This isn't me being defensive. This is just, I'm really excited about all this. I think there's one stage, which is we just need to normalise these conversations. In some senses, you don't need me. It's no surprise that at some point we're all going to die. So encouraging those conversations to happen as general things within a family are one of the things we're trying to put across. And in a sense, you almost need to get rid of the professionals, because we get in the way. Whereas making this the thing that we talk about, why wouldn't you let your son or daughter know what it is that you want, because you don't want your son and daughter worrying when you've died. That's kind of some of the line that we're coming across with what we're producing, in that it's during these weeks, let's just normalize the conversation. Have you told anybody what it is that you want? If not, why not? It's a hard conversation, but do you know what? It's harder if you don't have it. Then I think there's the thing about normalizing the conversation for healthcare professionals. But I think you need to have a hybrid way of doing that. YouTube videos are great for how far you can transmit that. But a lot of this stuff is practically having a go at it. It's a bit like saying you can learn to drive by watching a YouTube video. Well, yeah, there's probably certain things you can pick up from that YouTube video, but the only way you learn how to drive is sitting in the car, learning that when you stall it, it's a really bad thing and you need to make sure that cars are around. So one of the things that we've got funding for is doing work with role players, where actually people have a chance to have that conversation and get it wrong, and then have feedback from, you know, it doesn't matter if you do this badly, but how can you get that better? So I think it kind of needs a mixed response, because yeah, role play is quite difficult to do quite a lot of people quickly. But I think that YouTube stuff just scratches the surface. It doesn't really help you develop good skills at doing that. Then I would say the stuff that you need for specialists, the really, really difficult stuff. And that's probably where you need someone like me teaching. And we've are now the hub for the European Certificate of Palliative Care. So we teach a internationally recognized course, which again, we've got funding for people who need that kind of third tier of teaching. I know I'm rabbiting and going on, but what I just want to do is to say, look, I think there's some really, really exciting stuff happening.
Yeah, it is exciting for our area here, but there are many areas who are not looking at this and not looking at things. And it is about spreading the word. It's actually making sure that, you know, this type of information is available not just to the people of Shropshire, but to the people of Britain, and making it as much, you know, it is giving that conversation, because that's a conversation that needs to be held with every family.
Totally.
Heather.
This all sounds exactly, and certainly 2 years ago when you came to us, it's exactly what we want. But always the issue is embedding it within a culture so that people don't snap back. And that is the big question of all of this. And I know you're only on the beginning of this, but how are you actually going to do it? Because the cultural thing is fundamental, and people have views which can be quite significantly different to this pathway that you're putting in place.
Again, I think there'll be. I was dreading your questions, Heather. So I think I was probably right. I think I started off before COVID, moaning the fact that nobody really asked me what I did and nobody understood what I do. Post-COVID, it's the opposite. it's only come too clear to people what role palliative care and end of life care can have. So in some senses, as much as something good can come about the horrendous stuff that we've all lived through, one of the positive things about COVID is that people realise they're mortal. And people realise, that having these conversations is really important and has become important. So in some senses, I think there's a wave that we're still going on to go, look, we're not out of COVID. We've seen how awful this can be if you're not prepared. You can see that things can suddenly happen to you. Let's have the conversation. I think also it's suddenly become clear to healthcare professionals that this isn't the role for specialists. This is a role for healthcare professionals, full stop. Now, okay, if you're an orthopedic surgeon where all you're doing is hip operations all day, that's not being pejorative about orthopedic surgeons, but death isn't really part of what you do. I would still expect you to be able to have conversations with people that do involve that a relative has died or it hasn't gone that well. And some of this is that people not shying away from it, that the more that you do this, the more often you have it, it just becomes something that you do. Not that you become blasé about it and not that you don't do it with compassion, but it's something that you don't avoid. So I think 2 years ago, Heather, my response to your question would be, I don't know. I think my response to this question now is that I think everybody is actually on board with this. I think the third thing is that it's possible to get quite fundamentalist about people having to have conversations. I think it's our duty to offer people the ability and the opportunity to have it. But if we're respecting people's individual choice, then patients must be allowed to not have the conversation if they don't want to. Now, there might be many reasons why I think that's a bad idea. But as long as I'm making sure that people have the opportunity, I think it's the opportunity that matters rather than hitting people to make sure that they've had the conversation. And certainly in my experience, there are lots of people where I do my best to communicate and they don't want to know their prognosis, they don't want to know what the disease is, and they don't want to have conversations about end of life care. Now, that doesn't mean I give up, but I still think we need to have space for people to have that individual choice.
I think that's spot on, but presumably at some point you will need to measure this as well, just to see how effective it actually is.
Yeah, I guess a lot of these things are looking at this in a multifactorial way, because I think just one way won't capture the complexity of it. So some of it's going to be about how many people in various organizations have we reached. And we're kind of coming up with the idea of almost a curriculum of saying, OK, what is it that we expect you as a nurse on a general ward? What training do we expect you to have? And producing a passport that we make sure that they've had that and that passport gets updated. So we've got that low level of we know that our workforce is trained. But then actually looking at the outcome measures of when people go and have a look in people's houses, is the anticipatory stuff there? And also, I hate the word inappropriate admission to hospital because it implies that people with palliative care needs never need to go into hospital. It's a double negative. I'm sorry, that was awful English. There are some people who have palliative care needs who absolutely do need to go into hospital. But it's where that person has said, I don't want to go in, and the circumstances under which they don't want to go in are the circumstance they've omitted. I think that's a really powerful description, but it needs to be very nuanced. So if you had what we call spinal cord compression, if you had a tumor in your spine, there is something we can do very quickly to stabilize that. And I would not want to say ever that's an inappropriate admission, because that happens to people who've got a palliative diagnosis. So that was again a typical Willis Burbley answer to say I think you're right, but I think we need to be very careful about what the measures that we do, and it can't just be numbers. I think some of it is about are we capturing and are people regularly updated with what they're being trained with?
Thanks, and my question is actually about measurement. You came to the committee in April, and I think this committee asked the question, how will you measure the impact of this work? And the answer was that you would actually go and ask participants, including people with lived experience, how will we know if we make the changes that we've got it right, which I think is an excellent question. And I suppose my comment about what we've been presented here today is that there doesn't appear to be that audit built into this. And I think certainly it's welcome. Competency framework is welcome. But we were talking in our previous session about how we can have lovely plans and things on paper, but how do we know if this is actually going to work? Will policies and procedures be changed as well? Will they be measured and audited against, or is this about producing additional competency frameworks and training?
Steve's got his hand up. I've talked far too much. I'm going to let him say something.
That is amazingly kind. Thank you, Derek. So I think the two last questions I think are really important, and they're questions that you'd expect a director of transformation and a board member to ask of its people and of himself. So there is a system maturity framework that's been established by NHS that covers leadership. It covers the use of data for quality improvement. It covers integrating care, use of resources, strategic co-production, governance, commissioning and contracting, and workforce, and the workforce bit you pick up, training, etc. I want to just join the last question with the culture question, because not all things about culture can be measured. So the soft stuff is really important. I would expect it to be more compliments from families and loved ones about the care of their loved ones in the end of life. I'd expect it to be less complaints. I'd expect our quality reports from the Care Quality Commission to be demonstrating outstanding for all the elements around end of life care pathways, not just for individual providers, but they can see as the CQC matures into a integrated space, which it's doing in some areas, for example, cancer care, the thematic reviews around cancer care, then you would expect to see the feedback in the triangulation as the way they do it, which is mix of patients' experiences, decent data, and the well-led domains. You would expect to see that being recorded. Sorry, I've got people in the house who are just not. I've got builders in the front room. It's the joy of home working. So I'd expect to see that. So Derek, I'll let you pick up as I just say goodbye to my builders and let them out. Excuse me.
Okay, so again, you wouldn't expect me to give you a sentence. I'm sorry, this is going to be a paragraph. There are national standards that we are expected to measure what we're doing against. So there's the Nhs Improvement Standards, which we are part of the framework that are doing. So the matrix that we're feeding into measures these by an external standard. There's also a national group called Ambitions for End of Life Care, which again is a nationally approved group. Again, we are measuring our outcomes against that. And to reassure you, it's a mixture of process. What's the process like? Have we got systems in place within the whole healthcare thing which make sure that good end of life care happens and that there are outcomes that at the end of it? I'm always slightly worried about outcomes of end of life care because those of you who may remember, there was a thing called the Liverpool Care Pathway, which was brought in, which was very, very much processed on outcomes, which missed the quality of what happened in between. So I do think these two national standards, which we can provide you with the kind of description of what that is, well, measure against this makes sense. The other thing that we're trying to do locally with one of the task and finish groups, which was the what's the pathway, is to actually share good practice and say what works well, produce what works well, and then recommend it and work out how we do that across the system, and then measure whether we're doing the what goes well. So as well as having the external, we kind of want to celebrate what's good about here, what works with the kind of mixed economy of a very rural with a very kind of urban environment. And so we've got a national standard and we're working out what our internal standard should be. And then, as I say, I think coming up with some form of passport and curriculum and making sure that all staff have done that to that standard is another way of assuring that at least there's knowledge within the system.
So really what we need now is timelines. Sorry, Hilary.
Yeah.
Ian as well, Chair. Ian, yep.
Yeah. Sorry, and I may have already missed this,
but I just wanted to really home in on those who look after people at end of life at home. We're not in a hospice or hospital. And I know you talked about all the groups that are represented on your group, but how do you capture the views of people who have lived this experience at home without the support of hospital or hospice, and who are primarily dealing with primary care? And is there a way in for those people to contribute to your planning?
They're represented on the groups.
Right, okay. As it's a little bit more on that really, you mentioned a 24-hour helpline. I think one of the major issues that people dealing with this at home on their own mainly is having to ring round a lot of different places to get a little bit of help about a specific issue. Is your 24-hour helpline in place, or do people still have to do the ringing round, not really knowing who to contact?
So the hospice has a 24-hour advice line which has run for years. We now also have Shropdoc with its own dedicated line. Again, that's not open to everyone. That's open to those people who've identified already as having palliative care or end-of-life care needs. The third bit that we need to work out is having just a general advice line for 24, because you're right, sometimes it's confusing about who to go to. And what you're picking us up on is saying, yeah, there's lots of stuff for those people who are already under particular services. What about those people who have no particular way in? And that's the particular point that we're working on with the 24/7, is how, and the end of life coordinator, how do we make it so there's almost an information hub, if you like, which means that people are pointed in the right direction.
Great, thank you.
Ian. You don't want to talk to you.
Gotcha. Derek, I don't want to pour water on what you're doing, because I personally think that this respect form is one of the best things that's been done for a long, long time.
Thank you.
What I do want to draw your attention to is a lady that I've been looking after for a while. She went into Royal Shrewsbury with diabetes all over the place, came out with a lung cancer diagnosis, and she was offered only palliative care. This was in April 2019. We managed to get Mr. Chatterjee to give her a cycle of chemotherapy, and her tumours shrank and continued to shrink. And she was still going strong. First Monday in September, a GP visited her because she got a chest complaint, arranged for her to go into the Royal Shrewsbury for IV antibiotics, and the call was put through at 9 o'clock in the evening for an ambulance. It turned up at 2 o'clock and loaded her up, and off she went. I was called the following morning. I went to the Royal Shrewsbury to find out how she was, only to find out that she wasn't there at all. She'd been taken to the Princess Royal. So we followed it through. But a respect form quite clearly says, she wants to remain at home at end of life, and she does not want admission to the Princess Royal Hospital for any reason. And 24 hours later, she died in the Princess Royal Hospital without her husband having a chance to see her again. He's 84, virtually blind. She was his carer. And I wonder how she managed to end up in Telford when she quite clearly expressed her wish to stay in Shrewsbury and at home at the end of life.
I'm really sorry to hear that story, and I hate it when that happens. But it's wrong of me to comment on a particular clinical situation when I don't know what's gone on. But the whole idea of using the respect document, you're right, is to ensure that this doesn't happen. Can I 100% guarantee that it's never going to happen? Of course I can't. And circumstances sometimes are going to be such, which is awful. And also you kind of don't know what the conversation was that was had at that point. All I can say is that that is happening less than it did before, because there's a more structured and formal way of this being written. And it's also clearer now to ambulance service and to hospital and to various places that this is the document that we're using. I'm deliberately being vague because I think it's wrong of me to comment on a case that I wasn't really involved in. And also I don't want to say, you know, 100% of the time we will always get it right. But what I can reassure you is that situations like that are less than they were.
You said the ambulance service are completely on board with this. I do know that in the middle of that night, Shrewsbury went off take, and so all ambulances were being diverted to Telford. So it's quite possible that that's how it happened. But the crew should have known that she didn't want to go to Telford. Anyway, I passed it on to the ambulance service, patient service, and they're going to come back to me on it. Look, maybe the ambulance service need a little bit of training on what to do in these circumstances. So,
I mean, some of it is just making sure that we get the documentation right and that as many places as possible, it's actually written down. So the computer record now, you're actually able to flag and say, this person's got a respect form, please look at it before you do anything. And again, as people are filling the form in, it's like, well, there's no point there is a point filling the form in, but make absolutely sure that all of the people out of hours who, let's face it, look after the patients the most, that everybody is informed as they possibly can, so you're not putting anybody as much as you can in a difficult situation.
As I said, I don't want to pour water on it because it's working well in the majority of cases. I think I've had quite a few people who've done their respect forms and they've got exactly what it was that they wanted, and the families have been so grateful that that is the way that it happened. So just wanted to draw your attention to.
Thank you. And there's always something to learn from those cases, and the devil really is in the detail, isn't it, of drilling down and going, why in this particular case did it go wrong, and is there anything in particular that we can learn from it? So thank you for bringing that up. We have set up a learning from deaths group, which is particular things like this where it didn't go well, is to go, okay, what do we need to change, and also when it did go well, why it went well, and actually can we be reassured that this is going to keep happening. So a lot of that stuff now gets fed back into the system for us as a group to kind of learn from it.
Maybe one of the questions that need to be asked by the ambulance services, do they have a respect form? Kate.
Yeah, thanks. I suppose it's related to my earlier question, which is about the kind of building audit, and you know, how will we know if we've done well, and you know, that case in a sense highlights it, as well as the, you know, the number of people with lived experience who've fed into this process, who I believe have had similar cases as well. And I don't want to dwell on the negative. I mean, the respect form does look very impressive, and you know, hopefully it's the right way to go. Well, no, I'm sure it's the right way to go. I suppose it's about how will we know, is it being implemented, and that's not built into anything that you've brought to us today. We have a list of what you're doing, but it's about how do we know when it's working?
In a sense, I'm already telling you that it is, I guess, because the external people looking at it, as I say, about a year ago when this was done pre-COVID, 60% of people actually were having respect filled in, which was a huge improvement. So we're going to continue to do internal audits of respect forms itself. It's a nationally recognised document. So the reason that that's not there is that actually this is working. It's the other bits that we kind of need to look at of the system itself and education that we really feel are the priorities as the people on the ground looking after people with end of life care. So, and I guess respect feeds into what the pathway's like as well. So it will get re-looked at. Steve's got his hand up.
Yeah, I think that the question's a great one. I think we need to come back with this is how we're going to demonstrate that we know it's happening. And I've alluded to the regional framework that's used that incorporates the quality improvement methods and good use of data. So we've got to name that data. And the data clearly is going to be a mix of people and families' experience of the process. So it's going to be process outcomes rather than clear outcomes itself. So I think the challenge which I'll take away, colleagues, is that we have to bring that back and demonstrate the how do we know with some very clear narrative and metrics within a strategy as it gets implemented.
I think really my biggest fear is this. I mean, we've sat through before an end of life process, and this was done with Defibrillation and Shropshire, where they came and they told us, and this is not part of this lead, this was about 4, 5, 6 years ago, where they told us they would go and sitting down with the family, listening to what the family said, making sure that the person's wishes were respected. It didn't happen. It was just one of those exercises. They were going to do an audit of everybody on, I think there was something like about 100 families in Telford alone that they were dealing with. It just didn't happen, and it died a death. So what we'll try to make sure that this doesn't die a death, because we'd like a timeline for implement. Well, it's already been implemented, really. Thank you. But we'll come back in 12 months' time and we will relook at this to make sure that it isn't dying. It's great while we've got Derek there pushing with his team and making sure this is happening, and and you've got all this buzz going on there. What we want to make sure is that it doesn't just lie on the surface and then 12 months down the line it's a forgotten night.
And if it dies, it needs palliative care.
Well, yeah, I was about to say that's probably an unfortunate phrase to say about the stuff that I'm dying of death. I hope what we're demonstrating is that a lot of the things that people have said that they wanted to do, we've actually gone and done it. And actually, we want to carry on doing it. And I think that will be independent of me, because what my aim is that, if and when they're fed up of me and I stop doing this stuff will carry on. And part of that is just making sure that at the grassroots level, everybody gets good and understands why they need to do this. And I think the understanding why now more than ever, I think people do. But part of it now is our responsibilities to point people in the right direction for where they can actually get the abilities and the skills to do it. We've talked about having a DNA CPAR form that's the same for 10 or 15 years. We've done it in 2 years. We've talked about having an advanced care plan that's done, and we've done it in 6 months. This group of people within the various places are kind of wanting to make changes now that they know that they can, and that those changes will make a difference. So again, I 100% can't tell you that that's happening, but I hope what we've demonstrated is that actually we're up for changing it, and actually the ICS are on our side to wanting to implement that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Look, we have received a letter. It's unfortunate, it was a very long letter. We haven't had an opportunity to be able to look at that. So if it's okay, we'll send it on to you for your comments. It's come from Gil George, and it also involves Councillor Evans from Shropshire. So we will send that on to you. As I say, unfortunately, we don't have time to digest it. So we'll do it. Can I thank you very much indeed? As I say, we will come back to this in 12 months' time and make sure that it's working properly and that it's still on high in people's agendas. Okay, thank you very much.
It's a real pleasure. And I guess as medical director, I'd like to unofficially thank councillors and chair for your support for us as a charity. We couldn't do this without your support too. So in my other job, I'd like to say thank you so much for your support.
All the best. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. See you, Steve.
Take care. Stay safe.
Bye.
All right. Quickly through on to the last item on the agenda, colleagues. And that is the programme. You got it in your screen? What's the programme for this year? You got it in front of you. Any comments? Anything to add? Obviously, if things crop up, as and when they crop up, then we will add it to it, and we're also going to try and make sure we get some workshops in here, so we can actually do some real talking. Okay.
But we do really need urgently to look at
back in that one.
The ambulance staff and the work with the hospital and turnaround times at the hospital.
I think that's going to be the meeting with the CCG or the
well, everybody, they all need to be there.
Yeah.
We need them all, and we need to do it sooner rather than later, because as soon as we've got into December, we're in winter pressures, we've got flu, we've got the lot.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, I'd like you to hold on for a few minutes, because I'd like to just review what we've been doing, but I'd like to go offline now, please.
Okay, just bear with me, I'll confirm when we're offline.
Thank you very much.
It is going to take long.
A few minutes. Thank you very much indeed.